Hello, I'm Professor Matthew Rotella, and in this tutorial, I'm going to be going over UV unwrapping this tea can that I modeled in my previous tutorial. And before we get into it and actually start UV unwrapping this guy, which luckily he's not too complicated when it comes to UV unwrapping, uh, but before we get into it, we want to take a look at the actual object and basically see what sort of textural elements that we want to include uh, in the final product, and use those elements and those desired elements to inform how we unwrap it. Uh, so for one, hold on, pardon me. Yeah. So for one, we have this like scalloping at the top, as well as this swirly design that wraps around the entirety of this main body here. And that scallop design also exists on the side of the lid. So there are certain places where we want to seamlessly wrap around. And that basically tells me that ideally, what I'm going to want to create is, uh, is I'm going to want to create some sort of tiling texture for the main body here, which will also help us when we're going to texture the brushed metal, which is a fairly prominent feature as far as like how this surface looks, this brushed metal texture. And yeah, so we have a few things that we want to seamlessly wrap all the way around. And what that tells me is I want both edges of my UV shell to be touching the edges of my UV space. That way I can create a tiling texture and it will just seamlessly wrap around the bulk of my object. And that will also help make things look really natural and smooth, because basically the main features of my object won't have any sort of the main features of my object won't have any sort of seams that people can see that would sort of break the illusion that what I'm creating is a real object, since ideally the end goal would be some sort of photorealism. But aside from those basic like color and brush metal textures, also things that we want to pay attention to is like dirt that we're going to want to be painting, and scratches, and try and see where we'd want to be placing a lot of those, so that we don't like place a seam in the middle here, and then that would make uh, like painting on scratches in certain places really difficult. Uh, Also, with dirt, gathering dirt and grunge and rust and that sort of thing, gathering in like the corners of objects. Uh, Sometimes extending like this bottom shell, for example, either extending this bottom shell up or what will eventually be this like side shell down, uh, to include some of the other. Basically, just what I'm getting at is not placing the seam right directly in the corner, to give yourself a little more leeway with uh, painting specifically in nooks and crannies where we can add some extra detail to have dirt hiding in there, which similar thing on the inside of the can. It's not as prominent as the outside, but yeah. So those are the kind of details that we want to try and pay attention to, and also, of course, things like on the top and on the sides where there's words. You want to make sure that places with words have very little distortion and are very flat, so that you can easily place your words on those features on the model. But enough of that. Let's get into it. So, gonna hide my lid for now. Don't need to be looking at that. Gonna hide my reference. All right. So to get started, I'll open up my UV editor, which will also have my UV toolkit coming along with it when I open it up. And we're going to be going all over the place in this thing. Now, I modeled using a cube, so it's just all distorted and pulled cube UVs is what I'm looking at to start here. And basically you can see that like all these white edges are seams that exist on it. And I just want to make sure that there aren't any errant seams. I want to be placing all the seams myself. So to start, I'll get rid of them all. And the way I'll do that is just do a projection of the whole object. A lot of times I like to just start with a planar projection of some sort. I'll just do it from the z-axis, and now we basically have, and this keep image width and height ratio isn't usually checked on by default. Basically what that does is it keeps the dimensions of whatever you projected. If that's off, it ought stretch whatever you project to hit every single edge of your UV space. Yeah, now that I have a projection of my entire object, you can see that I don't have any seams anywhere around my object. So now it's time to start cutting it up and placing those seams. So I'm going to throw my UV editor over here, and I'm just going to go through certain parts and start cutting it to bits. Luckily, we have some really nice places to hide some seams with this model, because you want to put seams in places that are as inconspicuous as possible. Right up here in these nooks is an excellent place. Just double clicked on that and I can see I selected the whole edge all the way around. Gonna hit cut and do the same thing on the bottom. Double click, cut, and then I just want to decide where to place my seam so that I can further unwrap this into one long flat shell. I think probably this corner right here would be a good place to hide it. So I'm going to select this guy, focus in there. I have these extra edges to use as smoothing information. So I gotta make sure that I get in there and select them. And then cut. Alright, so I'm gonna hide my vertical seam there, which again, I'm gonna end up having this meet the edges perfectly, which there are tools to help you do that quite easily. And that will help me make a totally seamless texture. So I'm gonna select this outer shell right here, and I'm going to go to the unfold section. I'm going to unfold it in U, which will give me just one nice long strip. And if I turn on my checkerboard, you can see that I essentially have perfect squares, and I have undistorted lettering, which is exactly what you want to see. Now to align it to either edge of the map, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Align and Snap. I'm going to normalize it in U, and that'll make it meet either edge of the map. And from here, I'll start trucking. So what I'm going to do next is start defining where I want my seams to be. So basically my next shell is going to be from in here in that nook coming over the top, and then this inner wall. So you can either place your seam right in the corner, which is oftentimes a good place to hide it, or you could place it up one just to give yourself a little more just to give yourself a little play when texturing in here. Or I could even go, yeah, I'll go up one like so, and I will cut. And now what I'll do is I'm going to select this shell, that you see here. And instead of keeping it as is, I'm actually going to reproject this UV cylindrical, which will unwrap it, going around in a circle, giving me a nice strip to use. And then what I'll do is I'm going to move this vertical seam to be, just so that I know I'm able to, just to help me keep myself oriented as I paint my textures as to where I am on my model. I'm going to try and keep this seam continuous, at least in its general placement throughout the model. So I'm going to go into edge selection mode, focus on this corner edge, and have it wrap around into here. Then what I'm going to do is cut, then select the seam that it made for me, when I projected it, and hit stitch together, which stitch together is going to automatically move my two shells without distorting them. Now, the issue here, we're not done yet with this particular shell, is that because of how it's cylindrically unwrapped, and because of how it's stretched to meet the edges of my UV space, you can see that we have quite a lot of distortion and stretching happening. So I'm just going to select this shell. I'm going to unfold it along V. And what that'll do for me is all of these edges, you can see here, if I turn this on, that we have a lot of UVs that are overlapping each other in a way that we don't want right here. So again, let's select this shell, unfold along V, which will give me this nice strip here. And then I will normalize it in U. Well, I'm going to put it in this UV space and normalize it. What I might also do is, since this is my main workspace in here, is I might move these other shells to a different space so it's not overlapping where I'm trying to sort of place and arrange things and generally work here. Now what I'm going to do also, I'm going to go into UV selection mode, select these UVs at the end, scale them all the way in so that this edge is flat, which will give me a little bit of distortion, but the advantage it gives me is that it allows me to make, I'm going to renormalize this, it allows me to make a reasonably seamless texture. As I go from one to the next. Alright, I'm done with the shell now. Next up, we have this shell here that we want to cut. Again, I'm gonna place my seam a little up. You can feel free to place it in the corner, but I think this will help me texture later if I place this seam a little up. And cut. And now to get a pretty flat shell to start for the top here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring out my planner mapping again. That's under UV. Open up the options for my planner mapping. I'm going to project it from Y. As you can see, it's this top face, basically. So I'll get a projection in Y, and now we basically have a nice, clean projection to use, except we're going to have stretching here up on this. So we do need to unfold this just to get these edges out of there. So unfold, and now you can see that's pretty flat there. And now we'll move along. For this, I'm going to do a similar thing to what I did for the lip. What I'm going to do is go from this edge all the way to this edge and cut, just because people are less likely to look at the inside, which actually I could even do this instead. I could go all the way down to the corner here and cut. And we're going to see how this looks. Might not come out exactly how I want it, but I think this will function. Select this UV shell, UV, see, yeah, project it, cylindrical project, which again gives me a strip for my UV shell. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna change where projection height. Oh. All right. Pardon me, I was just playing with some things, because you can rotate this handle here to actually change where it's placing that seam. As opposed to doing a cut and hitting stitch together. Either way functions. Sometimes one is faster than the other, but yeah. So I'll select the shell, and again, we have quite a bit of awful distortion that we don't want. But what we're going to do is, since it's already unfolded in U, basically, I'm going to go to unfold and unfold it in V, which will have it come up and in, which you can see is happening with the words here. It's pretty much exactly what we want. Look at this. Looks like we're already perfectly straight also, which is wonderfully helpful. And now we have this one vertical seam. But now, once we normalize it, hopefully we can just use a tiling texture, and that vertical seam won't be seen at all. And then it'll basically look like we have a seamless wrap right there from here to into here. All right. So, moving along now, we have the inside, which I'm going to do the inside somewhat similarly to the outside. Select this edge all the way around, which if I press 4, I can see that I have, because I see it all highlighted orange, so I'll hit cut. And now select this UV shell, project from the top, which this is perfectly from corner the corner. It's already a perfectly flat plane, so all I'm going to have to do is open up my planar projection, and if I allow my UV space to be seen, I will get a perfect projection in Y there. Which looks like this top shell that I unfolded up here might be a little bit cockeyed. So what I'll do is just hit orient. There we go. And now it's nice and straight. Alright. Get this out of here. It's definitely useful to have a second monitor to help you out with these sorts of things. You can hit orient on this, and yeah, it was already perfectly straight, as I thought. Anyway, continuing, I'm going to check to make sure that I keep this on the same edge on the inside as well for this unwrap that I'm going to do for the inside. I'm going to select that top edge and bring it all the way down. Actually, I'll just bring it down to here. Again, I'm going to kind of leave this area to help me paint there without having to navigate a seam, specifically in the corner. And I'll hit cut. I'm going to select this bottom edge, or rather this bottom edge. Cut, UV, select this inner UV shell, unfold along, and that's going to be this guy up here, and we'll see him unfold along U, and then normalize, and I can check my distortion with my checker pattern, and we got perfect squares. No distortion whatsoever, which is exactly what we're looking for. And now we have just a few more shells to go. Got this one on the bottom. Again, planar project from Y, and that'll basically get it perfectly flat, although I need to fold this edge down. So just hit unfold in both, which gives me this shell right here, unfold in both, and then we're a little cockeyed again, hit orient, and I will normalize it, which I'll do that for all of these right here. Okay. So we just got two more shells left. These two at the bottom. Again, I'm just to make sure that when I'm painting, I stay oriented in a very similar fashion, sticking to the same edge. Grab this one, shift, double click, grab that one, cut. Now I have a seam. I'm going to place my edge, cut, and shell. Select this one, and UV cylindrical, which actually I saved myself some time by not cutting it yet. Again, I can. No, okay. I'm not even gonna fiddle with that. I'm just gonna do that cut again and then stitch together. Select that. Shift, double click, cut. Select this edge, shift, double click, stitch together. And now this UV shell is one big long strip, and once again we're going to want to be unfolding it in V, which will give us the results that we want. And I also again going to be selecting these edge UVs, grabbing them. Hold on. I'm going to move this to a space where I'm certain I won't be messing up any of my other shells. Grab it, scale it in, UV shell, normalize it into this space here, and now finally select this shell, planar project Y, and then unfold, and then orient, then normalize. We should be all good. Okay. Now it's time for the final layout here on the main can body, and then I'll have the lid. So I'm gonna hit stack on these, and that's the inner shell. Okay. So I'm going to grab all four of these flat shells right here, which if I press 4, you can see what I have. Grab all 4 of those. And then I'll hit layout along U, which will get me all 4 of them right next to each other. Real nice. And I think I'm going to have these towards the top. This one, which should be my main outer shell. Yep. I'm going to put that more towards the bottom. And then I'm going to, just to try and organize these in a way that makes sense to me. It's the top. But before we get there, I'm going to need this shell, which comes in. You can see how our edges line up. They don't line up perfectly from shell to shell. You can take the time to maneuver these vertices together, but undoing some of this, what appears to be distortion in the shell is actually giving you a lack of distortion when you texture. But if that means being able to more easily paint and reduce how your seams look, you might want to go and match up vertice for vertice so things seamlessly flow, but it's up to you. Once you see how the painting process works, you'll likely figure out what you would like. And then I think I'll have all 4 of these square pieces in the middle of the shell. And finally, this piece, the inside, will get laid out. All right. That's pretty much that. So I'm going to save this. which I probably should have saved somewhere along the line there, but just in case, make sure I don't lose my work, but I'll save it now, and that looks like it's going to be pretty good. The last thing we want to check for, now that we have a final layout more or less made, is we want to check and make sure that our squares are looking reasonably similarly sized throughout, which means that we'll have pretty similar texel density, as is often referred to. Because, of course, a space in the UV space doesn't represent just pixel, like one pixel. Like, this is relative to whatever, like this whole space could represent a, like a 400 by 400 pixel image, or it can represent like an 8K texture. So it's really just about the amount of real estate that it has in here. And keeping these squares relatively consistent from shell to shell will make you more easily able to just consistently keep using the same tools and same pieces of texture as you texture from piece to piece, which you can see that these here are a decent bit smaller than like these here, for example. But even though it's not necessarily ideal, I'm going to keep it for the sake of making sure that my edges line up between the shells and allowing me to have seamless textures to use and just tile that across the space there. Okay, so now we're just about done here. Now we just got to do the lid, which will be a decent bit simpler, or at least it'll be reasonably simple, but it'll be a lot more of the same. So what I'm going to try and do here is I mean, this shell is already basically what I want. Or no, it isn't. Heyo. You know, I'm going to do the same thing that I did before, except this time when I project, since my main feature is going to be this top face, I'm going to project from Y and get my whole lid as one big Y projection. And since there's a lot of scarring, so to speak, on the edge here, I'm going to start, because if I bring my images back up, you can see, well, it's not so bad here, but this is still where we're seeing the most wear on the lid, is right on the edge. We got some scratches. So to be able to more easily paint them, again, I'm going to place my seam here, cut, and we want to make sure that this is very flat. I'm going to hit unfold to fold that edge out that was previously down. I want to make sure that we have basically no distortion, and it's looking pretty good. I can check it in Y just to make sure that it's very flat. And then also this view, anything that's white basically means that it's, anything that's white means it is ideal, perfectly flat. Blue means it's getting compressed, and red is stretching. But yeah, that's nice and white, so that means I'm looking good. Alright, and now I would try and perhaps accomplish this all in one shell, but since from like the inside wrapping around to the outside, because I could do that as all one seamless shell, but to help me place that scalloping that is seen here at the bottom of the lid, that blue scalloping that I pointed out earlier, all of this right here. In order to help me place that, I want to have that be the bottom of my shell. So I'm going to go in here, just select this whole edge, cut it, and then select this shell, UV, cylindrical, and then unfold along U, well, or V would have done, but either way, it's perfectly unfolded. Normalize it to come to the edges, and it's just nice and straight because it's just one strip of straight polygons. Basically the easiest thing to unfold. Alright, and now find wherever it put my seam, because that's where I'm going to put my seam for this shell. But first I'm going to cut it. Again, I'm going one edge up just to help me when I'm painting in the corners here. And cut, UV, grab this, UV, cylindrical, and unfold along V. And I'll grab this down here, which is already projected from Y. So basically all I have to do is just fold that one edge out and we're good. These two, I'm going to do this. I'm going to hit orient and stack, or stack and orient. Now that'll line their edges up to be basically the same. And I'll hit layout along U. Get this guy. Normalize them. And then these two shells, I'll actually stack them also, and then hit layout along V. And the reason I'm going to hit layout along V, because this should actually allow me to make this basically seamless as it goes from one shell to the next. But and I could keep it like this, or I can give me a little bit of space just so that I can tell where that scalloping should stop. But it's more or less that. Basically the last thing to do would just be to take a look at my textile density, and like I said, I want to try and keep that relatively consistent between our shells, so I'm actually going to scale both of these top parts down, which that, with how they were, I got a higher resolution texture space out of it. It would allow for more textiles to fit in there, but for the sake of making things consistent, I'll put it like that, and then to give myself just some space to play around while I'm painting, I'll move them apart from each other. It's a little bit of an odd layout. The layout can be done differently, but I think this is how I would prefer it. And yeah, that's that. So now with that done, the entire object, the body, or the lid and the can body itself are both UV unwrapped, so I'll just hit File, Save Scene, and that's a wrap. If you have any questions, feel free to post them. And thank you very much. Thanks for watching. Hope that's helpful. To see yet another piece of geometry get UV unwrapped. Have a good day.